Okay, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And I also agree because I know it's very nice out here side my windows. I'm in Pennsylvania, so not too far away from probably some of you. I do hope that this presentation will be helpful for you, but what will be really helpful for me so that I can make sure I get all the information that you want to you is if you'll participate in some of these Slido questions that I'm going to be asking throughout the presentation. So if you could join my Slido right now and just go to slido.com and enter S419 or put your phone over the hashtag, that will automatically bring up the polls, and we'll have a little survey and I'll be able to take your questions that way as well. Or you are welcome to put them in the chat and Emily can always read those out if I don't see those. So we'll go ahead and get started. I hope you're all set up at slido.com. And my first Slido question for you is here. What are you actually hoping to learn from this presentation? Now, I know we have a few people on here, so I'm going to wait till I at least get a couple responses. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I have worked in financial aid for over 25 years. I worked at multiple schools. I worked as an administrator, as a director of financial aid. And I've seen students from the beginning, meaning an undergraduate and high school, just preparing to go to college. Then I've seen graduate students. And most recently, I work with pre-med, med students, and residents about managing money. And that can be borrowing, that can be repaying student loans, and that can even be general financial wellness. So I hope that the resources that I provide to you today, the information that I can share with you today will be helpful to you. I can already tell you that, yes, we are going to go over scholarship and grant information. We will be talking about loans. Now, it'll be federal loans. So the person that's asking about international student funding, we may need to have additional discussion afterwards, and that's totally fine. I'll give you an email address. Same with resources for DACA. I actually have a number of resources, but they are not part of this presentation. So we will get you those answers. You'll just need to email me. And how to find resources. I have the information for you for that. As well as talking about the cost of medical school, financial aid, scholarships, and nobody said it here, but most people are concerned about repaying the money that they borrow. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. So thank you for joining. I hope you will all continue to participate as we go forward. So we are going to talk all about financing medical school. And I think the first thing is knowing where to go for reputable, reliable resources. And I would guide you to the FIRST website. FIRST is it's a program through the Association of American Medical Colleges. I actually work primarily with the FIRST program, as well as financial wellness. And we have a number of resources for you that you may not even be aware of. I'm going to ask you, just if you can in the chat, are you familiar with the FIRST program? If you could just type in a yes or a no, that would be helpful for me to know. No, I'm seeing no's. Okay. Well, then you're definitely going to get some resources to help you. So this page that you're seeing on the screen is our home page. Now, I will tell you, we are working on redesigning this to move some things around a bit. But the way that is probably the easiest for you to find information that you will need is by using a search tool that we have available. And you can see that search now button that's there on the right-hand side. It'll actually take you to a search page to look at all of our resources. We have the Education Debt Manager. This is our most comprehensive resource. It is not only going to go over loans, about applying for loans, about the different repayment plans, but we also have information in here about loan repayment as far as looking at different scenarios. We have information about credit and budgeting and tax incentives. for education tax incentive. So I would definitely bookmark this. We update this at least 2 times a year. So it's going to be updated based upon federal student aid regulations whenever they change. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. As I mentioned, we have the Search Now feature on the first homepage. This is going to allow you to better find the resources that you're specifically looking for. You can search by audience or category. So like you could search by pre-meds, or you could search by a category, meaning you want all information about credit, or you might have a keyword in mind, such as scholarship. I know many of you are interested in finding information about scholarships. So I would put scholarship in my search tool. I'd push go, and what you're going to see are all of the resources that have scholarship in their name or in their description. That will give you information to then go and research and look into more. So I do encourage you to use this page to find that kind of information. A little bit later, we're going to talk about some of the other programs that are going to be mentioned within all of these resources that you can also look at. The other thing that I think is going to be helpful for you to specifically hone in on what you're looking for is by using our fact sheets. These fact sheets range in topics, and you can see the topics on the left side of the page, from applicants and students to residents, repayment and credit, and budgeting. You can take a look at all of those and then click on whichever fact sheet might be of interest to you. We also have a number of resources available, financial resources available through the Financial Wellness Program. This is a free program. It is open to anybody. You do not have to be a health profession student. You do not even have to be a student. This is all financial wellness information. So it's general. It's talking about credit and budgeting and spending and creating financial plans and setting goals, maybe even learning about taxes or insurance. So it's all information that all consumers need to know. And I would encourage you to take a look at that. Now, get ready, because we're going to have some questions through Slido. All right, so my question is, how much is it going to cost to apply to medical school? How much do you think it actually does cost? Go ahead, and many of you may know. Some of you might have to take a guess, but let me know, what do you think it's going to cost you to apply to medical school? Not actually pay for medical school, but just the application part. Anybody else? Oh, there we go. I'm seeing 500 to about 4,000, at least from those that participated. And thank you for participating. So it's all over, right? I mean, costs are going to actually be variable. So I can't say any of you are wrong. What I can say is that it's going to depend upon you in some cases, and what kind of resources you are going to choose to use. For instance, there are ranges of costs, okay? So when I have all of these costs listed on the left-hand side, then I have the range of what it could look like. And then I took an example based upon, okay, what if I was going to apply to medical school? What might I do based upon some of the averages that we know? Well, not everybody participates in an MCAT preparation course, right? But they are out there. There are also more free or low cost resources like the MCAT prep bundle that the AAMC offers. Well, if you took advantage of that lower cost item, that's $294. I've also seen MCAT preparation courses up in the thousands of dollars range. So that is going to, of course, add to your cost of those or the expense of that application cost. Now, of course, you're going to have the registration, because you're going to need to take the MCAT exam. That's across the board, $320. Now, some of you might be interested in the medical school admissions requirements. This is the MSAR. This is a document or a database that will provide you with information about the schools, what their requirements are, what their mission is. It will help you find out what kind of financial aid is offered. Do they accept international students? Do they accept DACA students? All this kind of information can be found in the MSAR. We actually publish what the schools report to us. So it's all school based. If you want a subscription, you could get one for 1 or 2 years. If you do a 2-year subscription, that's $36 and so on. We have AMCAS. Of course, you're going to apply for medical school if you take the MCAT exam. I shouldn't say of course, but most likely you're going to apply, and then there could be transcript costs in there. Some schools could have secondary application fees, not all, but some could. Some could require a situational judgment test like the Casper test. If that's the case, of course, that's an additional cost. Then we have the whole topic of interviews. Well, right now, a lot of interviews are virtual, right? So that does cut down on some of the cost, at least for travel and transportation and lodging and food, right? If you're doing this remotely. Some of you may be going to the schools though. Some of you may have to even go for a second look at some point, and that's all going to have an impact on that total cost. And then it comes down to deposits. Some schools are going to require a deposit if you're intending to go. So if I just do my sample costs, and I do have some question marks in there, I'm at about $3,800. So those of you that said 500 up to 4,000, I didn't see anybody say more than 4,000. So I would say, based upon my sample, that's where you could be there or a little bit lower, depending upon what it happens. I will tell you, as far as interview goes, we have been told in the past that most students are spending about $1,000 if they were traveling for interviews. Now, I did the sample, but there's also this great resource from the Office of Health Professions Advising at Princeton University. You're going to see some samples in there, but you're going to see also some additional information that I think is important for you. And it doesn't have to be specifically to medical students. This is for all health professions, but I would go ahead and take a look at that. Now, one of the things that can help cut down on the cost is our fee assistance program. This is a program through the AAMC that provides assistance to help cover some of the costs associated with applying to medical school. As with all programs, you do have to meet the eligibility requirements. As you can see here, they are listed: U.S. citizen, lawful permanent resident, DACA recipient. They're all listed here. Those are the requirements, the eligibility requirements. Then there's a component that's tied to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services poverty level guidelines. That information is also used to determine whether or not you're eligible for fee assistance benefits. Now, parental information is required. So even if you're an independent student, meaning under federal regulation, if you're 24, married, have children, things like that, in a graduate or professional student role, you're automatically independent. And that means you don't need parental information in most cases for the FAFSA form. However, we are requiring that parental information to determine your eligibility based upon the funds that may or may not be available to you. I will tell you, for the 2021 year, the poverty guidelines have stayed the same as when we increased them last year due to the pandemic. So that's great news for you. I would go ahead and take a look into this program. It is very beneficial for those who qualify. If you add up all of the benefits, they total more than $2,000 if you take advantage of all of these, if you're eligible. There's a reduced MCAT fee and registration. There's free MCAT materials. You get complimentary access to MSAR. You get a waiver for up to 20 medical school application designations. And if needed, there is accommodations for MCAT and for the application. But it's really important to know that benefits aren't retroactive. So if you know that you want to apply for the fee assistance program, you want to do that prior to signing up to take the MCAT exam, because you won't be able to get that money back. In all actuality, there's a really great resource for you to read about this program so that you understand what and how to submit your application to make sure that it's the most comprehensive application that you can submit. You can go to aamc.org/FAP, and this is actually required reading for submitting your application, so you could get a jump start on that. There is an application process. Usually the application cycle opens in February and closes in December. Some of your information, if you have an AAMC profile, could transfer over into your application. All of your information is going to be reviewed by the fee assistance program staff. That is not me, but we have an actual staff that is dedicated to administrating the fee assistance program. You're going to need to upload information for the application, and then usually you're going to get an answer as far as whether or not you qualify for fee assistance benefits within 10 business days. So it's a pretty quick turnaround time. If you need to talk to someone about your application, if you have questions or extenuating circumstances, I encourage you to reach out. You can call our helpline at 202-828-0600 or email the fee assistance program staff. They are there to help you as well. I wouldn't personally recommend tweeting at AMCAS info, but you can follow them and follow some of the information that they put out that can be helpful for you as you're preparing to apply to medical school. Now, once we talk about the cost, it doesn't stop there, right? You know, you're going to also have the cost of paying for medical school. So how much does it actually cost? Well, I'm wondering, do you know what the median amount of the student loan debt was for the 2020 grads? We don't have the actual numbers for the class of 2021 yet. So I'm thinking, do you know what the totals were for 2020? How much do you think the median amount of debt was for the class of 2020? Now, I know you're still there. So is anybody going to participate? That's the big question. Awesome. 200, 250, 100. Well, I can tell you that you could all potentially be right, because the amount that you borrow is going to be different than the amount that the school actually charges for tuition and fees. You can find this information every year. We put out what's called the Education Debt Fact Card. The median amount of debt for the class of 2020 was actually $200,000. We do have it broken down by public and private schools. We also have more information on this card that you might be interested in, such as pre-medical education debt, medical education debt, so you can see the breakdown. What kind of debt are students dealing with that are non-educational debt, and even cost of schools, so the tuition and fees for private and public schools as well. Now that brings me to the cost of attendance. So the cost of attendance at a school, and as you know, is not just tuition and fees. You have your transportation, miscellaneous expenses, books and supplies, other charges that the school may require of you. Maybe it's insurance. So all of that goes into that total cost of attendance. The same thing happens for medical schools. You have the private cost of attendance and you have public school cost of attendance. And if you total those over 4 years, unless it's a 3-year program, you can see what the cost of a 4-year education would be. And this was for 2021. So you're looking at $259 versus $346. Now, just because those costs are different for public versus private, you can see here the median cost of attendance are listed, okay? But what did people actually borrow? Well, the median debt for public was $200 and the median debt for private was $220. So just because a school costs more doesn't mean you're going to be borrowing more to go to that school. I tell you this because I don't want you to eliminate any particular school based upon cost. You are going to be able to pay for medical school. And I hope, if nothing else, this presentation shows you that. I don't want you to think that the cost should be a hindrance, because it shouldn't. Yes, you might have to take out loans, you may have to borrow money, but you're going to be able to repay it. You're going to be able to work and provide for yourself. So just keep that in mind. Don't eliminate any school based upon cost. Now, you can be frugal, you can be careful about what you're spending, and that has an impact on how much you're actually going to be borrowing. So how do you apply for this financial aid to get to those loan amounts that you just saw were common? Well, there's process, right? And you can look at this fact sheet that we have out on the first site to go through this process. But the very first thing that I tell students to do is check the school's financial aid web pages. Most of the time, schools are going to have all of the information right there for you on a financial aid page. Now, I will be the first to say, sometimes I go out to schools' web pages and it might be hard to get to financial aid. Lots of times it's under student services. Sometimes it could be under something else and you have to do a general search. But I do encourage you to take the time to do that, because many times you're going to see what kind of loans are offered. You're going to see if they have any scholarships that they offer. You're going to see if they have any deadlines for the scholarships, or even applying for any kind of school-based aid. So it's important to know what their deadlines are, what their process is, and usually you're going to find that on the school's financial aid pages. Once you have all that information, and this will show up there too, they're going to tell you that you need to complete the FAFSA at studentaid.gov. FAFSA is free application for federal student aid. If you're going to apply for federal aid, you're going to need an FSA ID and a password, and you're going to keep that for the rest of the time that you borrow money. You probably may, some of you may have loans now, so you already have an FSA ID and password, and that's great because you'll be able to access all of your information all in one spot. Now, you will have to fill out the FAFSA based upon when you're planning on getting aid. And so when you're going to fill out depends on when you're planning on going to medical school. Filling out the FAFSA is going to require your income tax information, and it's called prior year. So it's basically 2 years ago's tax information when you're filling out the FAFSA form. So you can get this information on studentaid.gov, but I just wanted to make sure you know that applying and making sure you fill out the appropriate FAFSA form is going to be helpful. All right, once you fill out that information, you also want to find out whether or not the school has a secondary financial aid application. They may have one just for school-based aid. If that's the case, you'll want to make sure that you complete that. And also find out about those scholarships. Please use those scholarship resources on the first page. Use that search tool to find those. Use the information and the links, and listen and keep your ears and eyes open about other opportunities that may be out there. Just because they're not listed doesn't mean that somebody might not be offering a scholarship, especially sometimes it's just a matter of you asking to find out. There are institutional scholarship resources, and then there are other possibilities. So I have in the middle of the page a lot of the common websites where people will go to search for scholarships, and you can use any of these. Now, I do always throw out a word of caution when looking for scholarships. Now, and especially now, I should say, because of the pandemic, there have been a lot of scams. There's been a lot of increase in identity theft. So be very careful when you're applying for these types of aid. If my general rule of thumb is if they're giving you free money for a scholarship, then you shouldn't have to pay money to apply for that scholarship. That's just my recommendation. The school may offer some scholarships that can come before or after you're admitted to the school or you have an admissions notification. Sometimes schools have specialized scholarships, so you'd want to take a look at that as well. Then there's other possibilities that might be out there, such as medical associations. The AMA, American Medical Association, they have a scholarship. There could be some local or national foundations or alumni resources that you could tap into for scholarships. And many times there are minority specific organizations like SNMA or LMSA. LMSA and SNMA are two different student organizations. So they're worth checking out. Even if they don't have anything to offer you, they may have links to other kinds of resources. So I do encourage that. And I encourage that while you're in school as well. Many times people think of applying for scholarships as, okay, I'm going to do this for my first year, but it's what about the second and the third and the fourth year? You have to be consistently looking for that. And I know you're really, really busy. You don't have time for that, but it's the same for undergraduate. You probably look for a lot your first year. You may or may not have continued with those, but there could be things out there for you. So when I talk about financial aid, I'm actually talking about everything that's involved. That can be grants and scholarships. That can be need or merit-based aid. Then most of the time we're talking about loans, but there are different kinds of loans. There's federal loans, institutional loans, and private loans. If you take a look at the fact sheet on what's an aid offer, we go over this kind of information. Once you fill out that FAFSA form, it gets submitted to studentaid.gov. You're going to list the schools that you want to receive your information. Once they get that, they're going to come up with an aid offer for you so that you can take a look at what kind of aid is offered at one school versus another. We're going to talk about all of these different kinds of loans because that's, as you saw, people are borrowing loans to pay for medical school. So there's two kinds of federal loans that are mostly taken out. And again, this is going to be those that are eligible for federal aid. So unfortunately, DACA students are not going to qualify, and international students, unless they have the appropriate qualifications, aren't going to qualify for federal monies. But this federal loan would come from the Department of Education. The school determines how much you're eligible for. With a direct unsubsidized loan, there is no credit check. So if you apply for this loan, you're going to get this loan. But you have to fill out what's called a master promissory note, which is basically the loan application in order to get the money. And you have to go through entrance counseling. It's the same kind of counseling that you would have gone through if you took out a loan for undergraduate study. And you can do that at studentaid.gov unless your school requires it in some other manner. You are able to borrow up to the school's cost of attendance. So tuition, fees, room and board, transportation, miscellaneous expenses, all of those things that the school includes in their cost of attendance, you can borrow to cover. And honestly, most students are going to borrow monies to cover room and board, transportation, and all of those other expenses. You're not going to have to pay on the direct unsubsidized loan while you're in school. And once you graduate, you have a 6-month grace period before you have to start paying back on the loan. And I should say, you don't even have to start paying back then, because there are some postponement options through what's called a medical residency forbearance, which says you are not required to make any payments while you're in residency if you choose to go that route. Now, as you can see, there is a cost associated with loans. There's an interest rate. So whenever you borrow an unsubsidized loan, there is going to be interest accruing on that loan from the time that it's dispersed to the school until that loan is paid in full. The interest rate is going to change every academic year. Usually we find out in May when the next year's rate is set. Once it is set, it is a fixed rate. Once that money is dispersed to you, the interest rate is not going to change unless you consolidate, which would be after you're done with school. There is an origination fee to get this loan. Now, this is not money out of pocket. This is if you applied for $10,000, the origination fee would be 1.06% of that $10,000, and that is actually deducted from the loan before the monies are sent to the school. At that point, the school takes what they need to cover all of their required expenses, books, tuition and fees, and any other expenses that they are actually charging you for. And then if your loan covers all of those expenses, you're likely going to have a refund that is distributed to you that most students are going to use for living expenses. Now, sometimes the direct unsubsidized loan is not enough to cover all of your expenses. If that's the case, then there's what's called the direct plus loan. There is a plus loan for parents, and they wouldn't be eligible to take out a loan for you when you're in a graduate professionals program. But you as a graduate professional student can borrow what's called the direct plus loan for graduate professional students. This is also a federal loan, and you're not going to take this loan unless you absolutely need it because it's above and beyond what the unsubsidized loan would cover. There is a credit check. So if any of you are concerned about credit issues, now is the time to get those issues taken care of, because if you need a direct plus loan, you're going to have not stellar credit, but you can't have any negative or adverse credit history on your credit report. You're going to fill out the master promissory note for this. You're going to go through entrance counseling, which is required for any federal loan. And that's just so that you understand what your rights and responsibilities are for borrowing this federal loan money. Just like the direct unsubsidized loan, you don't have to pay on this loan while you're in school. You don't have to pay on it within that 6-month grace period timeframe. After that 6 months is over, you can actually postpone payment on this, or you can move into loan repayment with the plus loan as well. Now, what I really wanted to draw your attention to here is that the interest rate is higher than a direct unsubsidized loan. It's 1 percentage point higher, but it really differs in that origination fee. It's quadruple the amount of the direct unsubsidized loan. So it's a more costly loan, which is why I say you want to borrow this only if you need to, because it's going to cost you more money over the long run. But again, you can borrow this, especially if you need to borrow more money than what the direct unsubsidized loan offers to you. Now, there are some institutional loans. Sometimes schools will offer an institutional loan because they have endowment money and they have it set up to provide a loan to the students. Many times, institutional loans are going to either have lower interest rates than the federal government's rates, or maybe they'll have a better term in the respect of they're going to pay all of the interest on the loan while you're in school. Or maybe they say that you don't have to pay on the loan until after you're done with residency. There's all different ways that institutional loans work, and it's going to vary depending upon the institution. So that is why I say check out the school's websites, check out MSAR if you have access to that subscription, because you are going to be able to see what kind of aid is offered. Now, there are private loans. Those students that don't qualify for federal loans, there's what's called a private loan. A private loan is when you take a loan out from a bank, a credit union, some financial institution. It is not going to follow the federal regulation guidelines. This loan is going to be based upon what the lender requires of you. Many times, private loans will require a cosigner, but there are loans that won't require a cosigner, which can be important for some students. Now, what you have to realize is that many times private loans are going to be more costly because of perhaps origination fees, perhaps because of interest, but many times the reason why private loans are sometimes attractive to people are because they are offered at the lower interest rate than what the federal government is. My caution is that if you qualify for federal aid, I would usually steer you in the direction of applying and taking federal aid over a private loan, even if the interest rate is higher for a federal loan. The reason I say that is because there are borrower benefits associated with federal loans that are not going to be available through private loans. And when I'm talking borrower benefits, I'm talking about that the loan postponement option, that deferment or forbearance. Sometimes private loans offer those and sometimes they don't. Sometimes private loans will say immediately after graduation, you go into repayment over this set period of time and this is what your payment's going to be. That's fine if you're okay with that and if you can make that payment. Whereas federal loans may offer a little bit more flexibility in loan repayment. They do offer disability and death forgiveness, whereas not all private loans would. And private loans, if they require a cosigner, that means you're attaching somebody else's credit to your application. And I'll just be honest with you, I think sometimes people are hesitant to be a cosigner on somebody else's loan because it does tie up their credit. And if they need to, borrow a loan for some other purpose, it could have an impact on them. So I just want you to understand the differences. And we do have a fact sheet that talks a little bit more about federal versus private loans. Now, what do you need to know about your loans? Well, I think there's a number of things. And one of those things is borrowing in the right order. You want to borrow the loan amounts or take advantage of the scholarships or assistance that's provided to you so that it's going to be the least costly. So I always think of that pyramid. You want to start at the purple line. You want to get scholarships and grants because normally they're free. I say normally because sometimes scholarships or grants will have requirements associated with them. And if you don't meet those requirements, then it could turn into a loan. So again, knowing and understanding what how the program works is going to be helpful. You can see the interest rates here for the 2021 year. And you can see that there is another kind of loan on here, and it's called primary care loans. And a second loan is called loans for disadvantaged students. These are federal loans, but they're through HRSA, the Health and Human Services. It's HRSA.gov. These are lower interest rate loans that are set at 5%, and they offer some benefits such as being subsidized, meaning they pay the interest on the loan while you're in school, whereas the direct unsubsidized and the direct plus loan are accruing interest that you're going to be responsible for. The only thing is, not all schools are able to participate in the primary care loan or loans for disadvantaged students. So that's going to be dependent upon school. And then the least likely place to go for borrowing would be a credit card, or I do have private loans up there, but keep in mind, sometimes private loans are the only option for some students, and that's okay. You just need to be aware of how they work and what the interest rates are and what kind of impact that's going to have for you. I talk about this interest because I think it's really important for you to understand how interest works. I can sit here and tell you that interest is accruing on your loan, but what does that mean in terms of actual numbers? Well, I'm going to show you an example based upon a 2019 graduate. Now, you're probably saying, why are you doing a 2019 graduate? Why not a 2022 or 2021? Well, because of the pandemic, there has been some educational loan relief through the CARES Act and other types of laws that have passed because of the pandemic. So this is showing you a pre-pandemic look at what student aid and interest look like, because what's happened, while these benefits are great, the CARES Act benefits, the administrative forbearance laws and regulations that have been passed, they're helpful to you because it's less money that's accruing on your loans if you have an unsubsidized loan right now, but it may not be as realistic as in the future when things go back to the way they were pre-pandemic. So that's why I'm showing you a 2019 graduate. Just wanted to put that out there. So if a 2019 graduate borrowed $200,000 while they were in school, based upon the interest rates for those 4 years, they would have accrued $25,300 in interest. That's saying if they didn't pay on any of the interest that accrued, which you're not required to. Some students may choose to do so, but you're not required to. Then during that 6-month grace period, once you graduate, interest is continuing to accrue. So at the tune of about another $6,100. After after that 6-month grace period happens, capitalization occurs. What's capitalization? Well, it's when all of that outstanding interest gets added to your principal, and now you have a new larger principal balance going forward. This new principal balance will now accrue interest moving forward until your loans are paid in full. Okay, so capitalization is a process that you're not going to be able to not feel unless you pay all of the interest off on your loans while you're in medical school. But I'll be honest with you, most of the time I am hearing from students that tell me, well, I'm borrowing to live, I'm borrowing for housing, I'm borrowing for food. I don't have the money set aside to pay the interest on my loan, and that's okay. On the same hand, I always talk to graduating students who say to me, what if I have some money that can pay on the interest before capitalization? I say, if you have the money and you choose to do so, you could certainly apply it to your loans before capitalization occurs. But if you're in that situation, you're probably going to be thinking about, well, now I'm moving on to residency. Do I need some of that money to set up my new apartment, my new housing situation? So there's a lot of things to consider about this kind of thing, and as far as paying the interest on the loans. The next thing that I think is important to know, because it always comes up, is will I be able to repay my loans, and how long is it going to take me to repay these loans? So I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on this topic? How long do you think it will take you to pay off your student loan debt? And I want you to think as if you borrowed for undergraduate, perhaps not, but if you did borrow for medical school, how long do you think it's going to take you to pay off your loans? Anybody else? Many years, 15, 10, 20, 5? That's great. Okay. You are all potentially right, because it's going to be dependent upon you. All right. I always like to show a repayment example so that I think it can maybe ease some of those overwhelming thoughts of borrowing money and looking at what repayment might look like. Now, I do a whole repayment session. I can talk an hour and a half about repaying student loans. I'm not going to do that here, but I want you to get an overview of what it could look like. Again, I'm basing this upon how the situation was for a 2019 graduate so that you can see a realistic look at pre-pandemic and how it's going to be in the future. So right now, or I should say in 2019, if somebody graduated from medical school, went into a 3-year residency, had borrowed $200,000 during residency, their salary was about $59,000. Post-residency, their salary was $190,000. What does repayment look in that situation? Well, the one thing I want to point out first is take a look at the very top here. Residency net income. That means if I'm earning $59,000, I'm going to be earning or taking home approximately $3,400 a month to live off of. That's what I have to pay all of my bills. Post-residency, when your salary jumps, what happens to that take-home pay? That jumps too. So we're up to about $11,000 a month at that point in time. Okay, so keep those things in mind when you're looking at this. So the top line is forbearance. That's what, when I was saying about postponing payment, that's what a forbearance is. So this is showing somebody that chose to do forbearance during residency and then moved into the standard repayment plan. So those of you that were saying 10 years, that could be a standard plan because that's the term for standard. But keep in mind, with federal loans, if you pay the loans off early, there is no penalty. You can do that whenever you want. You can pay more on your loans whenever you want. It's just that you'll be required to make a minimum monthly payment once you get into one of these repayment plans. So in that top example, forbearance and standard, you have no monthly payment. And then after residency, you're going to pay for an additional 10 years. So that's where I get the 13. After residency, your payment would be $3,200 a month. Now, keep in mind, that's when you're bringing home just about $11,000 a month. So you're likely going to be able to make that kind of payment. Of course, it's going to be dependent upon your financial situation at that time, how you want to manage your loans. If you just paid that minimum payment for 10 years, you would pay a total of $384,000. The next two lines where it says pay and repay, those are what's called income-driven repayment plans. That means your monthly payment is based upon your income and your household size. It has nothing to do with how much money you actually borrowed. So it makes payment affordable while you're in residency if you want to make a payment. Now, of course, if you're making those low payments, you're going to be paying longer because you're not even paying off all of the interest that accumulates on a monthly basis until after your salary goes up, when your payment starts to go up. And that would be when you're paying that $1,500 to $2,300 after residency. As you can see, depending upon which plan you are in, you could pay less than you paid in the forbearance versus standard option. You could potentially in those income-driven repayment plans see some loan forgiveness, but it depends upon how much you borrowed, your household size information, and your salary information. So I wanted to show you this example so that one, if you look in the Education Debt Manager, you're going to see similar things so that you understand how they work. But really what I wanted to show to you is that yes, you could have no payment whatsoever while you're in residency, or you might choose a plan to make a minimum monthly payment. You could pay for 13 years, you could pay for 21, or you could pay even the loan off faster if you apply more than the monthly payment post residency when you have those funds. So it really is going to be up to you, and potentially even have some forgiveness in there. So I hope that eases some of your minds about what repayment could potentially look like and how long is it going to take. And yes, you are going to be able to repay it. You may not be able to repay it as fast as you would like while you're a resident, but post residency, you're going to have more flexibility in repaying that student loan debt. And then there are some programs that could help you repay your student loans. There are programs like public service loan forgiveness if you work for the nonprofit sector. Maybe you're interested in research and you go in and you work with the NIH and they help repay your federal student loans. Sometimes people are interested in the military, even on a part-time basis as a guard. With that situation, they give you a stipend. You're earning your regular salary through your residency program or post-residency program, and they help pay your student loans. There are a number of other programs, National Health Service Corps, where you might be interested in working in a underserved area. We have more information about these kinds of things under the repayment section of the fact sheets. There's things like Indian Health Service, loan repayment and scholarship options, National Health Service Corps, loan repayment and scholarship programs. I really do encourage you to take a look at especially those two programs, because not only do they have loan repayment assistance, but they have scholarship programs as well that you may be interested in. This is the HRSA website. When I was talking about that loans for disadvantaged students and the primary care loans, if a school participates, this is the website where you will get familiar with that loan, but they also have information about scholarships and loan repayment assistance as well. And then we have a number of videos and webinars out there. We have one about what programs are going to be available to help pay back your student loans, what the military can do for you. Now, granted, it's a little bit older of a video, but it's the same premise, and it still has accurate information on where you can go for more information. And then we have a database of programs. This database does not only show you loan repayment assistance and loan forgiveness options, but there are some scholarship options thrown in here, as well as you can break it down based upon your federal or state designation as well. So I encourage you to take a look at this database as well. Now, I know that was a lot of information. I do hope that this was helpful to you. I know there are some students that had DACA or international student questions about funding. I would encourage you to reach out to me individually at first@aamc.org. Just say, hey, Julie, I have some questions about blank, and I can certainly send you some information, at least what I have available. I would like your feedback about this presentation, whether it's helpful to you or not. If you could, again, answer the questions at Slido, I believe you'll be able to go through all of these without me flipping, but I do encourage you to rate the presentation and provide your feedback. At this time, I'm going to say, I wish you the best. I want you to succeed. I want you to know that if you want to go to medical school, you are going to be able to finance it. So I hope that that was helpful to you. I'm going to ask you if you have any questions. I don't know if you have the ability, Emily, do they have the ability to unmute themselves and chat, or how do you want to do that?
Yes, students, if you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself. You could raise your hand and ask, or you could just unmute and ask. Feel free to write questions in the chat, all of that. Before we ask questions, though, I do want to give Julie a round of applause. It could be virtual applause, but thank you so much, Julie. That was really, really beneficial, and it was really good information for me to have and for us advisors to have. So we really do appreciate that. But yes, students, at this time, if you have questions, please feel free to unmute yourself, write it in the chat, raise your hand, whatever.
Yes, because I want to make sure that I do answer your questions, or at least provide the resources. And if any of you are interested in these slides, I can get them to Emily, and you're welcome to share a PDF of the slides too. So URLs and all that good stuff will be there for you.
That would be great. Thank you, Julie.
Sure. I see a chat here. Can you share the email again? Sure. It's first. I'm going to go back there. Hopefully that doesn't mess up the Slido. Sorry. First@aamc.org. You guys are my guinea pigs because I haven't tried that Slido feedback in there. So I'm hoping it works. So thank you for helping me, even though you didn't know.
I thought that was cool. That was a good
I'm
good
hoping.
interactive
I really
piece.
want to hear what y'all have to say, because, you know, I can talk and think it's helpful, but if it's not getting what you need, then it's not helpful. So.
And I have a question, maybe just to get the ball rolling. We have some students in this chat who might be first year or second year students. They're far from, applying for loans for medical school, but is there anything that you think these students could be doing now to prepare themselves for that process?
Most definitely, yes. I would say if you are thinking about the cost, I would encourage you to use the financial wellness program. Start budgeting your money, start tracking where you're spending your money, because in all actuality, the truth is you need to save your money to apply to medical school, because there are no loans to apply for to get money to apply for MCAT, AMCAS, interviews, all that stuff. So it does take planning and pre-planning. Unfortunately, there's no funds for that. So getting your credit in order. We have resources about that. I know lots of times students are like, I don't have any credit. How do I do that? So listen in on some of those webinars. We have webinars every single month. I will be honest, they're not specifically for pre-med students. However, I would encourage you to sit in on them, because the more you hear this stuff all about loans and loan repayment, it's going to make you more comfortable with the information. It's going to make you realize, if you do have a question, what does this mean and where should I be going to get that information? So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, that is really, really great advice. And even if down the road, you like Julie said, maybe medical school, isn't your thing or anything, those wellness programs, learning financial wellness, that is a crucial life skill, not just for applying to medical schools. I think that's fabulous advice, Julie. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure.
Yeah. And I don't want to steal the floor. So if other folks have questions, please feel free to ask. I think this means you did a great job, Julie, and you answered everyone's question.
I hope so. But again, I truly mean it. Feel free to email me if you do need anything, and I'll get the slides over to you, Emily.
That would be perfect. Awesome. So I'm going to stop recording.